And in many cases, they start a business following somebody else deciding that their job is not going to continue. So in some cases, those people, like me, really have thought about starting a business for a long time, and the job loss was the trigger to actually move forward on a dream. Well, the reality is, if you focus on purpose first, the vast majority of the time, money will follow. You need to have a purpose that is really clear, and you need to have values that support the purpose. Here's one of the main differences. As an employee, if you're wrong more than 10% of the time, you're probably going to get in trouble. As an entrepreneur, if you're right 10% of the time, you're probably doing really well.
And that is coming up next on Bootstrapping Your Dreams show, so stay tuned. So, the big question is this: how are ambitious people like us, who don't have a lot of resources, did not go to Ivy League colleges, were not born into wealth, how do we become resourceful enough, use our creativity, our dedication, and a little bit of crazy to bootstrap our way to realizing our dreams? Whether it is launching a new company, launching a new app, or making it to the top of the corporate ladder. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. We have created a tremendous community of bootstrappers, entrepreneurs, and professionals who are ambitious, resourceful, and want to get things done. We brainstorm, support, and help each other out. So come join us. Navigate to bootstrapping.group, join today, and get the Startup Founders Technology Accelerator video series absolutely free. If you enjoy this video, then do let us know by hitting that like button now. Or if you want us to improve our content, then go ahead and hit that thumbs down button and give us your honest feedback in the comment section below. Here at Tetranoodle, we are passionate about entrepreneurship, technology, and innovation. Every week, we bring you insightful and engaging videos, interviews, tips, tricks, and strategies to help you grow your business or rise in your corporate profession. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing, and do not forget to hit that bell icon so that you are notified when we publish new content. Hello and welcome to this new episode of Bootstrapping Your Dreams show. I'm your host Manuj Aggarwal, and today we'll be talking with David Schreiner-Kam. David is a recognized authority on entrepreneurship, leadership development, and he's also the host of business podcast called Smashing the Plateau. David guides entrepreneurs in trusted teams that they have their backs and help them grow. His company produces curated educational content which gives expert, individual, and group mentorship, peer support to entrepreneurs with a team of like-minded and supported professionals around you, plus a proven life and work design process you can work towards your desired level of consistent monthly revenue. So welcome, David.
Thanks so much, Manuj. Hey, can I add one more thing to the introduction? Which is, yeah, so in addition to Smashing the Plateau, which we launched in 2014 and now has about 500 episodes out, we just launched a new podcast in addition called Going Solo, which is all about building your own successful business following a late career job loss.
Awesome, that's great. So we'll talk about that in the outro as well, and we'll put the link to your podcast in the show notes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive in, and to help us get familiar, can you tell us a little bit about your history, your background, how this all came about?
Sure. So I started my my professional life as a chemical engineer, and I worked in corporate for a few years. Then I went. I went into the nonprofit sector, and the trigger that caused me to make the switch was I got fired right after getting a big raise and a good performance review. And my boss called me into his office. He says, "David, I have good news and bad news. The good news is you're doing a great job. The bad news is you don't have a job." And so I decided that maybe corporate wasn't for me, and I went into something that I found would be, personally more rewarding, and I thought could impact individuals more directly, which is why I went into the not-for-profit sector. And then a little more than 2 decades later, following a very successful career in leadership and management, and I've been thinking about wanting to have more control over my life anyway. Um, the same thing happened again. I was out of a job again, nothing to do with my personal performance, but there were circumstances in the organization that had very little to do with me that meant my services were essentially no longer needed. And I thought to myself, well, I've thought about being an entrepreneur. I really wanted to have more control over my destiny. I guess now is the time to do it. So that was in 2006. And then I launched a rather simple consulting business with one person. It was me. And 13 years later, I've been a very happy and successful entrepreneur, and I've done lots of things besides consulting.
That's awesome. Great story. So, tell us a little bit about your business and how, what is it all about? Sounds very intriguing. You work with entrepreneurs, help them out. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. And it's actually very much linked to the podcast that we just launched. Um, you know, in looking at has been in our audience in Smashing the Plateau, who many of our clients are, and frankly, a lot of the people that are part of the Smashing the Plateau community, I see that there seems to be a similar theme, which is highly skilled people like me who worked in a particular field for a long time, and then they start a business. And in many cases, they start a business following somebody else deciding that their job is not going to continue. So in some cases, those people, like me, really have thought about starting a business for a long time, and that the job loss was the trigger to actually move forward on a dream. And the other category of people are those who think they're going to get another job, and then they start looking and they realize that the interviews aren't happening, or they're not getting interviews with the kinds of organizations that they think they're most qualified for. And it turns out that after searching for some time, they realize that the only way that they're going to get paid what they're worth and do something meaningful is to be self-employed. And so we actually focus quite a bit on people going through this, because it's actually a very challenging transition. It's a lot more challenging than most people realize. And if you look, if you do a search for any kind of resources or education on entrepreneurship, what you usually find is strategies and tactics for launching and operating a business. What it doesn't talk about with the resources, I find there's very little that talk about the trauma of job loss when you're probably in your 50s or your 60s, how to address that trauma, because it's real. And what you actually need to do before you even think about launching a business, because for most people, they're actually not able to launch a business on day one.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So that's quite interesting. So, and you know what? Like, it's very common because I have run into people who are going through this experience. I've had these type of experiences myself. So, do you think this is something to do with age factor?
Oh, ageism is a huge factor. And most companies, and I can tell you, I personally, when I was a hiring manager, there were times when I had an opening and I was flooded with applicants, ranging from entry level people to very experienced people. And I can think of one time in particular when I had an entry level job to fill. The job market was particularly bad, and so I had very senior people begging me for the job. These are people who had been earning double the budget that I had for this job. And I said to them, listen, I can't pay you what you were paid before. And they said, I don't care. I need to feed my family. I will take anything. And I was reluctant to hire them, because I thought as soon as they were able to find something better, they'd be out the door. And I thought I'd be better off hiring somebody who was younger and had less experience and could never command that kind of price tag, who I thought would stay longer. So ageism is certainly out there in the workplace. I personally have experienced it when I've applied for jobs. I've experienced it as a hiring manager, and then lots of people who are my clients and in my audience have experienced the same thing.
Yeah, well, that's true. Unfortunately, I hope there is some solution for this in the future. But let's talk about the age factor, because when we start a business, generally the consumers are in the millennial sort of age group. Will you agree with that? Like you have to, like even if you start a business, you have to deal with this age gap. Maybe you are in your 40s, 50s, 60s. You're trying to start a business, but your audience generally seems to be millennials. So, will you agree with that statement, first of all?
Well, yes and no. I think it really depends on what you're selling. So there are businesses that have that do not have a millennial target age. As an example, I'm not sure when this episode will go live, but there's a company called Boomer Benefits, which is all about Medicare for entrepreneurs. So that audience is definitely not millennials. That audience is baby boomers, and they actually have a very successful business selling to baby boomers. So in their case, they don't have to speak to millennials at all.
Yeah, actually, I think the founder was on this podcast in one of the episodes, like if I recall. So yeah, that's very true. But I think in your literature, in your work, I read a lot of references to millennials. So you said that millennials need a coach, not a manager or a boss. So can you unpack that statement for us?
Yeah. So when you are dealing with millennials, frankly, I see this as a trend for the younger part of the workforce is a much greater interest in performing work that they personally feel is meaningful and that they think is going to leave the world a better place than they currently find it. And for them, the meaning part of the work and the impact is at least as important as the money.
I see. But that can be said for anyone, right? Like not just millennials, because from what I understand, if you get into a line of work which is not aligned with your values, with exactly what you feel like doing, and which enriches you, you tend to sort of lose interest, and obviously you don't do well in that profession. So that applies to everyone, isn't it?
Well, I would say it can apply to everyone, but I see a lot of people who don't necessarily follow that pattern. I mean, if you take it for example, um, someone who works in the post office delivering mail may or may not care that much about whether the right uh, about the impact that postal mail makes on the world.
Yeah, yeah.
Yet they're doing a job and they want to get paid sufficiently, and they probably want to be able to retire from that job at some point and do something else.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. So, so that's true. So now, how do we solve this problem? How do you help your mentees to align these things and be fulfilled?
Well, I think, Manoj, one of the most important things to realize is that your primary job, if you're managing other people, whether it's millennials or anybody else, your primary job is to help them succeed in their job. It's
Yes.
not necessarily to yes you have goals for the company and goals for the organization, but as the direct supervisor, if you're not focused on helping your direct report succeed in his or her job, then you're not doing your own job. And the reality is your direct report is going to be way less engaged than he or she might be if you focus on helping them be successful.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. So now, getting back to that same question. So, what are the differences between a coach, a manager, and a boss? You very well laid out. What is the primary role of a manager, and I completely agree with you. Now, let's talk about the coach and boss aspect of it.
Right. Yeah. So a coach is someone who is going to help you um, fulfill some goals or expectations that you have set out and you believe you want to achieve.
Mhm.
A manager is someone who is getting you to perform as well as possible on a job.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. And now also, when we talk about millennials, generally they want a combination of profit and purpose. And, again, I see this tendency more in millennials rather than maybe boomers. So will you agree with that statement first of all?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, Manoj. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So how do we achieve this balance? How do we achieve a purpose in life and this urge to contribute something to society and yet make a profit, make a living, and make some cash out of it?
Well, the reality is, if you focus on purpose first, the vast majority of the time, money will follow. You need to have a purpose that is really clear, and you need to have values that support the purpose. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a sound business model, and you shouldn't have a business model that is predicting profit. Um, but you need to focus on what's the purpose of the business. You think about Simon Sinek with his very popular book and TED Talk, Start With Why. There's a reason why that's so popular, because if you don't focus on why you're doing what you're doing, you're probably going to really struggle to be profitable.
True, true. So now let's get into the meat of this discussion. Like, how many people you think are very self-aware in that they are able to figure out exactly what they want out of life? Because in my experience, it takes a lot of energy and courage to be able to face yourself and see inside you and say, okay, I'm aware of what I really want. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I would say yes, it certainly takes a lot of courage and self-awareness and self-reflection to be able to focus on understanding what you want. I would also say what you want or what you think you want is probably going to change for yourself over time. I can think of people I have known who were in their 90s and were still struggling to try to figure out what they wanted and trying to achieve it in the last few years that they had left on this earth. And at the same time, I see people who are um, uh, even before they were adults. I know teenagers who are very self-aware and are really clear on what they're doing. If you think right now, we're in the midst of it's now September, and in New York, the UN General Assembly is about to start, and there's a 16-year-old from Sweden who is kind of sweeping the world stage, focusing on climate change. I would say this is a young woman who's really clear on her purpose and is doing everything she can at 16 years old to make it happen worldwide.
Yeah. No, I read that story, very inspiring. But once again, these are I if I can say so, these are exceptions to the rule. So we can look at them, we can get inspired by them. But at the end of the day, what I feel like, people listen to these stories, they say, "Wow, look at this little girl, and she's making a difference." But they never sort of take that lesson and implement in their life. So do you use any tools, any frameworks, any strategies to help people in actually understanding it themselves and then applying it in their own lives?
Yeah, I ask a very simple question, which is, what's one thing you can do this week that you think is going to improve somebody else's life?
Oh, I see.
Just
That's
pick
very
one. Because if we think about the thousands that we can do, we're probably going to do nothing. But pick one that you think is achievable, and see if you can make it happen this week.
That's cool. So, people who may be stumped by that question, and maybe a lot of the answers I get, when we get into these type of discussions, is like, I have no talent, I have no experience. What can I do? I'm only a office clerk. So, what do you do to sort of dig a little bit deeper and get that talent out of them?
Um, well, one exercise that you can take that's pretty simple is to think back on your life. And this really makes no difference how old you are. Think back on your life. Think about one time when you can recall achieving something that was successful, that you felt good about doing, and you got some reactions from other people, and just write a couple paragraphs that explain the story, like what was the activity, what happened, and how did you feel about it afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. And now let's say, once we have figured out, okay, these are the things which we like to do, and we want to build a business around it. So what will be the next step in that journey?
Well, so the basic steps are, you've got to be clear on what it is you really love to do most. Second is, what do you think you're most competent at performing? Where have you gotten feedback that your competence has been helpful to other people? And look at that integration of both what you love to do, what you're most competent at performing. Um, Decide on one particular target audience that you feel really compelled to serve. Think about what problem you think you can help them solve based on, again, your desires and your competency. What's one problem you think you can solve for them? And then find some of those people and ask them about their problem, and talk to them. And if you think you can solve that problem and you're able to convince them to try you out to solve their problem and pay you for it, then you have a business. But unless you get somebody to actually pay you something, you don't have a business. And the reality is, most people spend way too much time in their own heads thinking about how they can solve somebody else's problem without actually talking to them about it.
Yeah, that's true. And so, in a way, is this going toward like a coaching and consulting type of a business, or there could be other types of businesses, other products, other services?
It would work for anything that's a product, a service, or an experience.
Okay.
If somebody has a pain and wants something and they're willing to, and they believe it has value for them, and they're willing to pay somebody else to make it happen, then there could be an exchange. That's a like simple exchange of value, which is your value proposition. If you're able to convince them that's something, not convince them, but if you're able to convince them that you're able to solve their desire, then you have a business.
Yeah, that's cool. And you rightly pointed out that if you just think about it, don't take any action, nothing will get done. But one of the key components of building a business is launching a business is sales and marketing, and that's a skill that it's a skill that people need to learn. A lot of people do not know the mechanics and what works, what doesn't work, and they end up shooting themselves in the foot, spending too much money or whatever. So how do you take a novice who's been a career professional, maybe does not know much about sales and marketing, to be able to sell their services?
So we have a pretty simple system
Mhm.
that we teach our clients, and we walk them through it. So I've kind of outlined what it is,
Mhm.
but we walk them through it with a series of frameworks that they can institute on their own with some guidance. But the reality is, it's all leading them to try to identify where there's a sales opportunity first, make that sale, and then build the solution.
I see. I see. That's great. And now, we are all about bootstrapping here. So, do you think these businesses can be built just bootstrapping, even if you are in a situation where you have lost a job, maybe you haven't found a job, and so you're obviously running low on funds, and even if you have some savings, you're very hesitant in investing in that state of mind. So, what do you think about that? Like, how can you start a business in that situation?
Um, but the reality is that if you reach out to people you know, most of them would be willing to speak to you, and there wouldn't need to be any exchange of funds. And so you can start with your own network and your own relationships to find people who are in the target market that you've decided you want to help,
Mhm.
so that you can have an initial conversation with somebody in that target market to understand what it is um, what their pain points are, and where they're willing to invest their money, which essentially becomes your initial sales call. That takes your time. It does not take your money.
I see. And like, do you also recommend using tools like social media, LinkedIn, doing outreach to get your first initial clients?
Not really. I recommend actually talking to people live.
I see.
And if you can actually do it in person, you're even better. But if you can't do it in person, you can do it through um, a phone call or um, a video conversation. There are a lot of different ways to communicate with people nowadays,
Right.
but it needs to be actually a live conversation, not something that's text based.
I see. And so, what are some of the typical mistakes that you see people make in this stage of trying to launch a business?
They worry about what it's going to look like and how people are going to react, and
Right.
they don't get started.
Mhm. So, is that like the hidden fear of rejection?
There's fear of rejection, there's fear of failure, there's fear that, especially for somebody who has had a successful career as an employee, there's fear that everything that I have developed over the last 20 to 30 years as an employee, all the money that I have saved, the reputation that I've built, it's all going to fall apart because I'm going to do something stupid as an entrepreneur.
Mm, yeah. So, like, do you will you say that this is sort of also, something that you mentioned earlier as well, like, it's driving towards adopting an entrepreneurial mindset, which is different from a career professional mindset?
Here's one of the main differences. As an employee, if you're wrong more than 10% of the time, you're probably going to get in trouble.
Mm.
As an entrepreneur, if you're right 10% of the time, you're probably doing really well.
Wow, that's a new one. I've never heard of it, but it's so true, though. It is so true. So how do you train your mentees to face that level of rejection and that level of disappointment, because they are going to run into that, and it is going to have an even more negative effect if they're already going through some challenges in their life.
So I ask them all this question, which is, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then I tell them they have to write the answer down. And when I hear the fear popping up a second time, I ask them to look at their answer.
So can you share any interesting anecdote that you may remember, like something that sort of talks about an aha moment that somebody had?
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody today who grew up very poor in a poor country, managed to immigrate to the U.S., got educated, got a good job, has been successful in business, and one of his answers is, yeah, I know where I came from. That was pretty bad, and I managed to get out of that. So whatever happens in with a job or business, I can probably overcome.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, it's a very interesting point. Like, we always get scared of the future, but we seldom try to learn lessons from our past, because, as you said, if we look at our past, most of us, we've had challenges and we were able to overcome it thus far. And so there is no reason to believe that we won't be able to overcome the future challenges as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
What ends up happening in the future, the vast majority of time, is way less than we fear.
Mm. Yeah. Because you have more resources, more experience, more connections, and all that, right?
Correct. This is a baby learns how to walk by falling down. So eventually, the baby hardly ever falls down. And as as a kid and as a teenager, they walk pretty well. And as an adult, they walk pretty well. So the same thing is true in business. We learn what not to do because we make a mistake, and if especially if it was a really painful mistake, chances are you're not going to make that mistake again.
Yeah, that's true. Now, let's talk about your entrepreneurial journey. Like, what were the mistakes that you made earlier on when you started in this journey of yours?
Not having enough confidence, which resulted in not charging enough.
Mhm.
That was a mistake that I made. Um, when people tell me that they want something, they were willing to pay for it, and I didn't always ask them. I didn't always ask them to pay or to pay enough.
I see. I see.
That's a pretty
So,
common one.
I see. And so, how did you come to that realization? Did somebody mentor you? Did somebody coach you, or did that revelation come to you on your own?
Both. Yeah, so people have told me that, and I look around and I see what other people are doing, and I spend a lot of time trying to learn to improve myself, which includes watching shows like this one, reading, going to events, hanging out with other people that know more than I do, and you know, over time we learn these things.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now let's talk about the team. So, are you a solopreneur or you have a team?
First of all, even though I use the term solopreneur, I think it's somewhat of a misnomer. I don't think you can actually do anything in business or in life without a team, because we're as humans, we're not like one of our biggest benefits is that we're social creatures. And the fact that there are 8 billion or however many of us there are on the planet is because we have figured out how to use socialization so that we can take advantage of the resources that are available. And the same thing is true as an entrepreneur. Uh, Although my business is mostly about me, I'm not the only one in the business. And my business wouldn't be successful without my team members. And the same thing is true with anybody who is in a business. Like, um, you take a simple service business where you think it's a freelancer doing the business. The reality is, like, most people will have somebody who has expertise in preparing tax returns to prepare their tax return. So that person is part of your business. And so, yeah, I definitely have team members who are part of it. Like the fact that I've been able to produce Smashing the Plateau and now Going Solo can't be done without a team. Even though it's not a huge team, it's still a team.
Yeah, that's for sure. But can you share with us any strategies, any tools you use to find the right people and retain them? Especially, again, putting myself in the shoes of a person who may have lost their job and they're trying to start a business and they need to hire. So first of all, this is their first experience hiring somebody, paying them from their own pocket. And how do you like recognize those the right team members? How do you make sure that it's going in the right direction? You build a cohesive team.
Sure. So if you've never done it before, it can be pretty scary to hire your first person. First thing you should do is be really clear on what you are most skilled at yourself, that will that you believe is going to be the most profitable part of your business. So that's not the part that you want to hire somebody else to perform, but the parts that are where you spending your time is probably not going to be so profitable. That's where you want to think about hiring team members. So as an example, if you're not particularly well organized and well structured, you might do really well to hire a strong virtual assistant who can help keep you organized, keep you structured, keep you on task, and anything that's repeatable that is administrative in nature, that person can follow. If you're not particularly good at technology, then getting somebody who has some technological skill can be super helpful. And what you can think about is what is it that is hardest for you to do, that you have to do frequently, and where if you were to take that time and use it yourself, you'd be able to make more money. Those are the things you should think about outsourcing. And it doesn't mean you have to hire somebody full time. There's so many ways to get help nowadays. So first of all, write down the outcome that you want from that person. What are the results you want? And then based on those results, what kinds of qualifications do you think that person has to have? And then think about where you might be able to find somebody like that on a part-time basis. And it could be that you could hire a college student. It could be you could go onto one of the sites like Upwork or Guru or Fiverr and hire somebody part-time who's not local. Ask your friends. And one trick that you can use to get started is don't necessarily hire somebody right away to do the full job, but take one really small task and perhaps think about hiring several people to do that task at the same time and see who, and pay them for it, and see who does the best job. Like if you want to start a blog and you don't love writing, you want somebody else to help you with the writing, hire 3 different people to write a blog post and see what the results are like and see how easy it is to work with them. And then pick one to continue and tell them you're only hiring them to write one post.
That's good. Those are good tactics for sure. And I completely agree with the one statement that you made was, which is, I completely forgot now. I'm blanking out. Sorry. Anyway, but I do agree with your premise, so for sure. Now let's talk about your podcast. So, Smashing the Plateau. What is it all about?
So Smashing the Plateau is about getting to the finished life in business and in life. There's so much out there about starting things, about starting a business, about change in direction, self-improvement. And the reality is that for most of us, we do what we do for a long period of time. And in today's world, if you're healthy and you're living into your 80s or your 90s, and you started working when you're in your 20s, you could be working for 60 to 70 years. So, what is it going to take for you to work successfully and be happy with the results for many decades? That's not so simple. And I found when I started Smashing the Plateau, I didn't see that there was a lot of discussion about that particular topic. So I started interviewing entrepreneurs who have been in people who have been in the business world for a long time, whether it's somebody who was an employee first and then became an entrepreneur, or they've always been an entrepreneur. Like, what's it like when you've been in business for a long time to overcome these unexpected roadblocks that do happen? And the reality is, the older you are, the harder these roadblocks are to overcome.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So you said that you have recorded episode 500 now?
It's about 500, yes.
Awesome. That's great. Well, please do check out this podcast. Sounds like an amazing podcast, and the new one that you mentioned, which is solo.
Going solo, building your own successful business following a late career job loss.
Awesome. That's great. Well,
they're both on the same site, smashingtheplateau.com.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation, David. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing this knowledge and wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manuj.
And that's all for now. Until next time. Now, if you're an entrepreneur or a career professional, then I invite you to join our growing community. Navigate to bootstrapping.group. As a welcome bonus, you will get the Startup Founders Technology Accelerator video series and Mastering Your Inner Game video series absolutely free. This series of short videos address some core issues which are instrumental in helping you move forward in your business or career. The videos are yours to view and share for free. No obligations or strings attached, except for one. You have to take action and implement it. So join us today. Navigate to bootstrapping.group. If you want more engaging videos and insightful interviews with industry's thought leaders, then check out the other videos we have picked for you. The link is right there. And if you want to be notified about our new content, please do consider subscribing to our channel.